Chapter 2, Alexis. The day before the great wave did not begin well. In the marbled morning light that reached across their breakfast table, Alexis gnawed at a loose thread in the cuff of her jumper and glared, narrow-eyed, at the door. The angry knocking from the other side was making flakes of old paint fall from the frame and dust the floorboards like snow. "Stay there and be quiet," her mother said in low warning as she went to answer it. The tithe collector's massive shadow dropped across the room as he filled the doorway, his pudgy hand extended like he was inviting Alexis' mother to dance. "Caris Wilde," he snapped. "Your tithes are overdue." Caris twisted the wooden bangle on her arm, standing before him with her feet turned in that timid way she had. "Good morning, Mr. Probert," she said meekly. "I am sorry we're late again." She gestured to the interior of their home. "We lost more slates off the roof in the last quake, and there's damp coming through the back wall now. It all costs money to repair." The hairy pink hand did not move. "You have to make do like everyone else, Miss Wilde. The temple needs maintaining too." He twitched his stubby fingers at her. Caris attempted a shy smile and tucked her mousy hair behind her ear. "Surely the source would see his followers safely sheltered first." Alexis gripped the edge of the table, the coarse wood clammy beneath her fingers. The tithe collector's face turned even pinker, his chest puffing. "It's not up to you to guess at the source's designs," he barked, his voice as loud as a drunken farmer on feast day. "You'll pay what you owe." Caris sighed, her shoulders sinking forward in defeat as she turned to the scratched wooden dresser, her fingers hesitating on the tarnished brass handle. "You'll leave us with nothing," she said quietly. But when Mr. Probert remained silent, she reluctantly tugged open the smallest drawer, her jaw tightening. Alexis stood too quickly, making the battered crockery on the breakfast tray rattle. "But we can't!" Caris glared sharply at her and held up a hand. "Shh!" she snapped. "Not now!" She scraped out the few loose coins and dropped them into the tithe collector's waiting hand. "For the sauce," she said flatly. He grunted in acknowledgement and added them to his already bulging pouch. "About time," he grumbled. "If you've nothing left now, maybe that'll teach you to plan better in future." He jabbed a stubby digit at Alexis over Caris's shoulder. "And teach that girl some manners. She's practically feral." Caris nodded. "Yes, Mr. Probert." She moved to close the door, but he stepped forward, his huge wedge of a foot blocking it. He leaned in so that his sweaty face glistened in the kitchen light. "An unmarried mother should try harder to set a good example," he growled. She bowed her head. "I will," she answered, so quietly that Alexis barely heard it. Alexis' eyes were locked on the collector's face, daring him. One more step. If he took one more step towards her mother, she told herself that she would bring the teapot down on his ugly bulbous head. She imagined it. The way his body would drop, the surprise on his face. They'd make her pay, but it would be worth it. Mr. Probert looked from Caris to Alexis and back again, frown lines turning the corners of his mouth down cartoonishly. "Good," he said eventually. "Let that be the end of your excuses." He withdrew his foot and was already striding away up the pavement before the door clattered closed behind him. Caris turned on her the moment the latch clicked. "For goodness sake, what did I tell you?" Her hands were shaking, and she smoothed the front of her apron to steady them. "There's no sense fighting with them." "But Ma'am, you'd fight the wind and expect it to change course," she sighed, waving a hand dismissively at her. "It is what it is, we'll make do." "With what?" "With our wits, like always," Caris smiled. She raised a hand and laid it on Alexis' cheek for a moment. "My little hurricane, like always. Everything will be fine." She shook herself like a pony dislodging flies, took a deep breath, and retreated into the tiny kitchen at the back of their house, brandishing her wooden spoon at the pan of porridge. "Ma'am!" "Come and get some breakfast. You're going to be late now, as is." Alexis sighed and raked her fingers through her mess of sun-streaked hair, watching her mother as she stood silhouetted against the light of the window, spooning the thin slop into a bowl. "Come now, quick sharp," Caris chided. "Thanks," Alexis muttered as she took the offered food and leaned back against the kitchen counter to eat, blowing gently at the heaped spoon in her hand. There's no jam or sugar today, so it's very dull. Alexis emptied the spoon into her mouth and immediately began to puff short little breaths over the top of the steaming mound on her tongue, fanning her hand in front of her open lips to cool it. What's new? She mumbled. Caris gave a half shrug of acknowledgement as Alexis gulped down a few more scolding mouthfuls. Come straight home after school today, she said, fixing her daughter with her best attempt at a stern look. Alexis rolled her eyes and pushed her feet into black boots, bought cheap from the import shop years ago and custom mended endlessly. Will do, ma'am, she said, flipping her hood up over her head. See you later. Bye, love, Caris called as the rickety door swung shut behind her. Alexis stared blankly at the portraits of old bishops that lined the walls of the classroom, lost in her own thoughts. Since her earliest childhood, she'd felt like a solitary question mark in a row of full stops. The temple servants would chastise her gently in answer to anything difficult. It's not our place to question the source's plan, they'd say. But instead of nodding quietly and lowering her head, Alexis stuck her chin up and blazed inwardly. She'd spent most of her education hiding in mediocrity at the back of the class, but now that her year group was dwindling, her cover was being stripped away. She had a little less than a year to go before she turned 18, and then all that remained would be for her to pick the career path that would be hers for the rest of her life. Be honest with yourself about where your skills lie, Mrs. Jones, the teacher rattled on. There's no point trying for creative roles in garment production if you've yet to show much design aptitude. Prayer is the answer. Alexis ignored the list of sheep-related professions written in perfect swooping cursive on the classroom board. The only career option that sounded bearable to her was to be a shepherdess and spend her days keeping only the wind and rocks for company. Felted, knitted, woven, it didn't really matter. Wool was the children of the valleys, past, present and future. The entire tract's singular purpose was the cultivation of the densely coated herds that grazed on the grassy hillsides. Powland sheep were distinctively tricoloured, black, white and a rich, earthy brown. After shearing, the more valuable black and white fleece was exported, and as a result the townspeople mostly reflected the brown tinge the town had, as though you were looking at them through an old ale bottle. Caris had acquired an orphaned lamb a few years ago as a gift from a farmer for helping him with the ewes in labour. They named it Barry Evans, after the farmer, and had a few blissful months while they shared its care, taking it in turns to feed him from a bottle and cuddle him. After Barry Evans had grown too big to live in the house, he'd been set free with the herd, a little metal tag in his ear that bore the word wild. Caris knew how her daughter hated to wear brown, so she always kept some of his fleece back for her. For a month after the shearing, she sat by the little stove in the kitchen, spinning it into wool at her wheel and then knitting, the silence of the evenings disturbed only by the soft click-clack of her needles. Mrs. Jones rapped sharply on the table to recapture wandering attention spans. This year we've been advised by the bishop that the most devout and talented student to graduate will be granted the opportunity to leave the valley and serve in deliverance in the ziggurat itself, no less. A low gasp of excitement echoed around the classroom at this announcement. Alexis rested her cheek in the palm of her hand and resisted the urge to roll her eyes as the teacher extrapolated. Had there been the slightest opportunity of her winning, she might have been excited at the idea of leaving the valley, but the white pyramid at the heart of the capital would not have been her first choice of destination. It was the home of the luminary and the conclave that governed them, and, Alexis presumed, several very talented former Powland Valley students who worked as maids or guards. Supposedly, the source himself had guided the people to build the ziggurat after the Great Wars, hundreds of years ago. That was when the world had been split into tracts, each with a singular mission, so that every person would know their purpose and never again have to experience the conflict and squalor that preceded them. Places too cold or barren or rocky to be of any material use were designated as feral land and abandoned for nature to reclaim. Alexis, are you listening? She glanced up, startled from her daydreaming. Sorry, what? What is impolite? Say pardon. Alexis turned her face toward a snicker and accidentally locked eyes with Caddy Ellis, the bishop's daughter. She scowled and looked away. Caddy was a tall girl with the lazy, dangerous grace of a mountain lynx. Captain of the girls' rabble-ball team, she was notoriously aggressive in action, as though she were trying to cram in as much excitement as possible before her inevitable future of passing round the collection dish and birthing pale, freckled babies. If Caddy resented her destiny, she kept it firmly to herself, though. As the bishop's daughter and only child, she had taken it upon herself to be his representative among her peers and police their behaviour with sharp eyes. She hated Alexis. Mrs. Jones furrowed her brows. "I expect you to be entirely present in my lessons, Miss Wilde." She cast her a last hard glare as she turned back to her desk and shuffled a stack of papers. "Fortunately for you, it's time for lunch. Try and wake yourself up before you come back." Alexis gave a curt half nod in acknowledgement, embarrassment making her quick to sweep her untouched notebook back into her satchel and break for the door. The schoolyard at the front of the building was a broadly unwelcoming spot. Half a dozen elderly shrubs limped over the edges of their concrete planters, beside a drinking fountain with a rusted metal spout that gave the water a disconcertingly bloody, metallic taste. Alexis strode for the freedom of the school gates as soon as her face touched the drizzle-damp air, the sliver of green visible through them infinitely preferable to the drab shadow of the neglected schoolhouse behind her. "Bye, Ferrell," someone called, followed immediately by a babble of laughter. Alexis clenched her jaw and carried on, clutching the strap of her satchel too tightly. She told herself she was only going out for the lunch break, that she would be back afterwards. Probably. "Be kind," she heard Caddy Ellis say. "She can't help the way she was raised. You can't expect a barn dog to act like a domesticated one." Alexis felt the familiar rage ignite inside her chest like a circuit completing beneath her collarbones, lighting her up. "What did you just say?" she spat as she turned on them. Somewhere in her mind she knew it was futile, that the glee in their eyes proved she was only giving them what they'd hoped to incite, but she rose to it anyway. "No offence, of course," Caddy smiled. Alexis stepped forward. She pictured the freckled skin of Caddy's high cheekbones splitting beneath her knuckles, her mass of red hair whipping backward like a conker on a string. She exhaled slowly, her nostrils flaring. "You're not worth it," she whispered as she turned away. "Good choice, barn dog!" Caddy's mocking voice trailed after her on the wind as she pounded out through the school gates, twisting out of sight and kicking a stone wall in frustration. Her palms were slick with sweat despite the grey chill of the day, and heat thrummed up her arms, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She looked down and rolled her sleeves up, jerking backward so violently at the sight that greeted her that she stumbled and almost lost her footing. The white marks on her arms, normally a pale filigree of scars, were glowing like lit gunpowder. She slapped at them in sudden panic, as though trying to douse a fire, but they shone on undiminished. Her heart pounding in her chest, Alexis held her arms stretched out taut in front of her, staring wide-eyed at them, as though she'd never seen them before. They felt as hot as a naked flame, but did not hurt. "What are you?" Caddy stood staring, her mouth hanging open and lip trembling in horror. Alexis ran.